everyone, and welcome to the North Texas Learning Curve podcast. I'm your co-host and sidekick Tapaswini Punna. I'm here with your host, Dr. Darrell.
Thanks, Tapaswini. Hi, everybody, and thanks. Tapaswini, you're getting really good at this.
Thank you.
I got to be honest, doing this kind of thing with me can't possibly be easy, but I think we're making it work pretty well. So it's great to have you as a doc student that's got a kind of a natural flair for pulling this kind of thing together with your co-hosting duties. Did you ever do anything like this when you were younger?
Actually, yes. I loved pretending to be a news anchor when I was little. During my childhood, I would take a notebook, write down random news from the news reportings and from news channels, and I would like to report it in front of my family. They were my first audience, though. I guess I have always enjoyed communicating ideas and engaging in conversations like this before.
Yeah, somehow I knew that probably was the case, yeah.
Well, Dr. Hull, today marks our fourth meeting date for the Trend Network this academic year. Would you like to tell folks about what Trend is and how they can get enrolled into it?
Yeah, it serves as a double kind of thing because I have a tie on today. I'm dressed up because, and I don't normally do this, but we have a special guest in town for our fourth meeting of the year. But let me tell you a little bit about the Trend Network. If you haven't heard, for those of you listening out there, our Department of Educational Psychology here at North Texas has operated this Office of Research Consulting for a long time now. And what it's done primarily is serve researchers and doctoral students around campus, primarily with research design, statistical consulting. But we decided when I took over the office last summer that maybe we would try to share this resource with the educational community all over North Texas. So I got to talking to friends and colleagues around in the school districts. And what I learned is that they have a lot of things they're doing, like educational programs and interventions in their schools, that they really would like to know more information about. Like they'd like to know how well they're working. So unfortunately, though, a lot of school districts don't have the resources to gauge somebody to conduct careful studies around their interventions, where they collect data after they've kind of imposed some kind of a research design around it. And then they also don't have available staff to do the work. So, the administrative professionals in the school districts that are responsible for evaluation assessment largely spend their time doing all the reporting work that's required to organizations like Texas Education Agency. So that costs us all as taxpayers and who have a vested interest in seeing our schools improve, because we just don't know the extent to which our educational interventions are having an effect on kids, or teachers, or administrators. We just sometimes they'll implement an intervention for longer than they perhaps intended to when it's having marginal effects, or they don't realize the unintended effects that an intervention might be having, positive or negative. That's basically why we started up this Trend organization.
So, what can people do to get involved in this?
Involvement is the key thing. I mean, we make it really simple. We've got a link here below the YouTube, down below there, for this pod. It's just a super simple little form for people to fill out. There's no cost involved. Just let us have your contact information. The other option is that you can just email us directly, and we'll put you in our database. You can email the Office of Research Consulting at coe-orc@unt.edu. And like you said, we're having our fourth meeting today of the academic year, and we've got 2 or 3 more meetings that we're going to hold this academic year still. So if you want to submit that member form and get notifications about our upcoming meetings, we'd like to have your contact info so we can keep you updated.
Things seem to be picking up really quick though, right?
I think faster than I expected. It's been pretty amazing actually because, like I said, we just started this network last summer. We've already got a full board of advisors from all over the North Texas area. We'll have people here from McKinney ISD today, Hurst Euless Bedford ISD, Dallas College. We've got advisory board members from Dallas ISD, Region 10 Education Service Center, Region 10, Richardson ISD, all over North Texas. And we now have also started up a new consortium of institutions of higher education that has all of the major higher education institutions or most of them, we'd like to have all of them, from the North Texas region, like SMU, TCU, Texas A&M University of Commerce, UT Dallas. So, it's really exciting to see how this is coming together, and I can't think of anybody I've talked to about this organization that's come to a meeting that hasn't said, how badly we need to have something like this so we can bring people together. It's not just a professional development organization to get you better at doing research or evaluation. This is really about making connections. So, yeah.
Speaking of Texas schools, it's time we introduced our special very guest for today because I'm sure he has some pretty information into what teachers in Texas think based on his own research work. Our guest today is Mr. Kurt Lockhart from the Charles Butt Foundation, otherwise we refer to as the CBF. The CBF has become one of the most influential foundations in Texas for education and in the nation really. Kurt is CBF's Senior Program Director for Data Insights.
Yeah, we're really, really lucky that Kurt took the time to drive up here today, so thank you so much, Kurt.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We're also really lucky to have a foundation like CBF that's fully devoted to public education. I was looking at your website the other day, and there's a letter there from your founder, Charles Butt, and he says, our education system must adapt and innovate to maximize the return on investment. And I think that quote is right on. I'd say that statement is about as consistent as it could be with what we're wanting to do with the Trend organization. So Kurt, again, thanks. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you. It's great to get out abroad around Texas and talk to folks who are doing the work around the state and learn more. That's the way we keep improving and keep connecting.
Yeah, well, before this podcast, I asked you to send me, some background information on yourself. So I kind of want to share a little bit of that information with our listeners. I already know you and I have one thing in common, which is our Fulbright experience. I did mine in Jamaica, but you did yours, I think you did yours in the Western Hemisphere too, somewhere like maybe Brazil or South America someplace. Was it?
That's right. I was picturing in my mind it would be on the beach or in something like that, but I actually was sent to the very south of Brazil. I worked at a university there, an area very similar to Texas, a lot of cowboy culture, barbecue culture. But I learned a lot about how do you teach English as a second language, and I learned Portuguese as well.
I was going to ask if
Great
you learned
experience.
Portuguese. You had to learn it while you were there?
Exactly. I had some folks there helping me learn, and I still have it somewhat, but a bit rusty.
How long did it take you to pick that up?
I'm still picking it up. It's several months, I think, before I
Did
can
you
really.
like talking in Portuguese or something?
I did.
You do?
It's a beautiful language. It was fun to exchange, right? I was helping folks learn English as they were helping me learn Portuguese.
So what were your main responsibilities there? You were at a university there? Which university?
Right, Universidad do Pampa. It's a federal university right on the border with Uruguay and Argentina,
Nice.
helping college students, undergrads mostly, with conversations in English, idioms, things like that.
That is cool.
Yeah. How about yours experience in Jamaica?
Yeah, mine was really cool too. I was at the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica. So a lot of people think of Jamaica as this lush paradise place, and it is, but not in Kingston. Kingston's a major metropolitan area there, but it's where the main university is. And so I had a visiting appointment there at the university in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. And I was working with the graduate students on their theses. And then my wife was with me, because she joined me. I don't know if your spouse got to join you on yours, but mine went with me, and she's a social worker, so she actually taught in the same department while we were there. But we loved it. I mean, it was just gorgeous. I would ride my bicycle out the back door right up into the Blue Mountains every day. Yeah, and the people were fantastic. We bought a car, drove it all over the island. It was amazing. But yeah, the Fulbright exchange program, there's nothing like being able to immerse yourself in the culture. I think you would agree, right?
Right.
Kurt, as a graduate student, I'm curious about how you found your way into CBF and what working at the foundation is like. I imagine your office is just down the hall from Mr. Bhatt. Like you guys sit around and have coffee each morning, thinking up the next data project.
Exactly.
That's how
Sounds
you
like
do.
that sounds like a great start to the day. No, we have a really great team of folks who work in all kinds of programs across the state, helping aspiring teachers. We have a great storytelling marketing team that tries to highlight what's good that's happening across the state, and then our research team, which is listening to Texans about what they think of public education. So it's a great place.
How big is your team there at CBF? Like your particular group or the whole staff there? It seems like it's a pretty sizable organization.
We're a small but mighty team. We try to collaborate with a lot of partners across the state, but small but mighty.
Okay, and then the data insights group, how big is that?
We've got about 4 folks on our team. We work with some external partners as well to do our polls, but it's a great group of folks with quantitative background, qualitative background.
Yeah.
So
Excellent. Yeah, that's great.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, are you guys looking for any promising data analysts that know about education maybe in about 4 years from now?
sure, let's stay in touch. That could be great.
All right, Kurt, can you tell us about, what's involved in doing these polls? Like, how do you get the ideas for them? How do you form those ideas? Who comes up with them? And then how do you come up with, like the topic that you're going to study, and then the process then after that to get it done? How does that work?
Right. It's a fun process. I've been with the foundation about 4 years now, so I've seen several cycles of these polls. We always try to start with listening to folks in the field like yourselves. What are the issues that you care about? How can we get out in the community, listen to what are the issues that Texans want to talk about, that teachers want to talk about? But then the hard part comes, where we try to get all those ideas and perspectives and boil it down into a questionnaire. And that is the questionnaire that will go out to whatever the population is we're surveying. And then we get that data back, try to pull out what are the key, most important takeaways, what are the trends we're seeing from year to year. And then we work at that great storytelling marketing department I mentioned to try to make a really beautiful project with data visualizations that we can get out there and present to folks like yourselves.
Yeah, I find that's key. It's one thing to do all that work. As a quantitative methodologist myself, it's so difficult to try to explain what I do to people external. The folks, like, your target populations are like just the general man on the street in Texas for one of your polls, right? Teachers for the other one. Like, how do you communicate those results to people so they kind of get it? That's never easy. So the data visualization stuff is important, I think. So it's good that you've got those kind of skills. So let's take a dive. I mean, now that we've talked about these 2 studies, let's kind of look at some of the work you've been doing. As I said, one of those studies has to do with public school funding and support, where you specifically polled just Texans. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the population that you polled, and it's an opinion poll, right?
Right, absolutely. And we try to focus on public school parents as well in that poll. So it's a poll of all Texans, right? Random sample from the state. But we have some questions just geared towards public school parents, asking them what they think about their child's education, what areas they want to see more funding or support in. So this is our 5th year of doing that poll.
Okay. Well, as interested as I'm sure some of our listeners would be at having at hearing about, your methodology in terms of how you do your sampling, the proportional weighting. I think what we're going to do is try to stick to your findings today. So in your Texas education poll, you looked at public perceptions and the future of education in Texas. And I did find some of the things that you came up with pretty remarkable. Like, for example, the poll suggested that as many as 94% of Texans support increased state funding for educational initiatives. Like, one of them in particular was expanding career and technical education. And I know most districts already have existing CTE programs. So what do you think is driving this strong, and I know you broke it down by different regions of the state too. So what's kind of driving, in your opinion, this strong public support? I mean, 94% is a huge amount.
And that's a key point that you mentioned. It's across groups, so across regions, political ideology, race, gender. We're able to look at a lot of those kind of subcategories, and we do see really strong support in the 90s for a lot of different programs supporting Texas public schools. I think there just is a growing awareness of all the things that schools can do, not only just providing a place for students to learn and grow, but also providing them the real world skills they need to succeed once they graduate. So that number you mentioned, the 94% of Texans supporting career and technical education, that's something a lot of folks have latched onto, and we hope that there'll be a lot more kind of research into why that is and what kind of programs might be useful there.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit of work in the career and technical education field myself. That has major implications for things like, in Waco we have the Texas State Technical College. That's naturally, I think, where a lot of these kids would end up. If they're doing career preparation work, they would go to one of these state-supported technical schools. I think that's a vastly underutilized resource in our state. But it's like the people are asking, let's start getting these kids ready to go places like that. Let's prepare them like when they're in high school. That career and technical preparation, so that they're on a pathway that gets them there, even doing the dual credit and stuff like that that's needed so that they can progress. I mean, it's great because you don't have to go 4 years to get a really good paying job if what you're interested in is doing things like, well, I'll be honest, even my own background, I went to Texas State Technical College. I got a 2-year degree in laser electro-optics. It was fantastic because I got to go get a job within a couple of years. I didn't have to spend all the money on a big education, to go get a job. So, yeah. So going back to the same report, do we know where existing programs are falling short? I'm sure our districts in North Texas would love to know how they could do better with their existing programs.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's more research to be done there. One area it seems like a lot of Texans want is funding support schools as kind of a hub, not just for students, but for students' families as well. So we saw pretty high rates of support for things like mental health services, dental services, lots of different services that could help folks in the community. So obviously funding is always a constraint in finding that for these kind of programs, but I think there's interesting areas that different districts in North Texas could look into for how their schools could best serve their communities.
Yeah, I think that in your report you referred to that as wraparound services, right? And that's a really new concept to me, is that schools would be provided. When I was a kid, it was just school and that was it. We didn't even think about the opportunity that there would be all of these other kinds of services available through schools. So that is a really different conceptualization. I think I saw another finding that was pretty illuminating in the report, and that is Texans' trust in teachers is really evident. I mean, one of the things that was highlighted is the positive impacts of teachers in their community's public schools. So, for example, 75% thought teachers should have a significant influence on deciding what's taught. and that the legislature, conversely, shouldn't have nearly as much influence. And I think that's remarkable. Have you thought about how can that trust be used to like further improve educational practices and policies?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something in the teacher poll, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon as well. We've asked teachers, what's important to you in the classroom, and a lot of them talk about autonomy and how important that is, and the joy they get from being creative, designing their own curriculum. So, it looks like Texans are responding and saying they trust teachers and want teachers to have that kind of control to teach in their classrooms, and teachers also are saying that's something that's important to them.
It strikes me that this is the intersection where trend kind of comes in, because as teachers come and administrators in schools come up with new ideas for programs that they want to implement with kids, these interventions, we need to know whether or not these ideas are working.
Right.
And I can't think of a better place to get the ideas from, but the external evidence that shows that they're working is that's where the research support really comes in, I think, right?
Right.
And I also see that the polling has been repeated for several years. How do the findings on the 2024 poll compare with that of the polling of the previous years? Are there any noticeable trends or shifts in the public opinion that you see?
Sure, we have noticed kind of a divergence between two subgroups. One is parents, right? Folks who currently have a student in schools, compared to non-parents, and that would be in our sample just folks who don't currently have a student in schools. We've noticed some differences that parents will tend to rate their schools higher, local schools, than non-parents, and also receive their news about schools in different ways. So those kind of trends I think are interesting implications for how administrators, how researchers think about engagement with the communities among public schools. Another thing I'll note is it's just a trend that we've tried to ask lots of different ways about public school funding and support. And every time we've gotten really high responses. Even as we add new kind of dimensions or ideas, the public has responded very strongly each year. So things like pre-K, things like I mentioned, those wraparound services, increasing pay for teachers. These are, every policy kind of idea we ask about, we've seen growing support from Texans for these.
I think we have to be realistic. I mean, a lot of these things that people ask for, they cost money.
Right.
And you guys, your job is to find out about this. It's not to finance it. I mean, you're a big foundation, but you can't finance all these things. This is information for our legislators and policymakers in the state, correct?
Right. We try to think about how can we use this information to help educate, anyone, policymakers,
Right.
practitioners, other researchers. Our goal is to try to get the findings out there to those folks who can turn that into practice as often as possible.
So if we extend that a little bit further, how do these polls have an impact on what you guys do internally, the foundation, in terms of your strategies and initiatives then moving forward? Do they impact you guys at all?
Right. I think they really help us think about the programs that we run, the kind of stories we try to tell around the state based on what we're learning every year. And then when we go out and present, we want to get feedback from folks and what's resonating with them, and that helps us as we continue to iterate. But I think one of the biggest ways we think about the impact is helping empower other folks, those other policymakers, practitioners, researchers. How can we get this information in their hands so that they can take action? Like, for example, if a school board wants to engage more with non-parents,
Right.
maybe there's findings from our poll of what communication strategy could be best to do that. So that's kind of the ways we try to think about our impact and how we can help those in the community.
Cool.
And I also found that to the study you did on teachers to be more impactful and revealing. For our listeners that do not know, the foundation also conducted a 2024 poll on Texas teachers that highlighted the challenges and opportunities within the teaching profession. Kurt, would you mind summarizing for our listeners what you found out about declining teacher salaries and what factors do you think that have contributed to this decline?
Definitely, it's a big question. And over the 5 years of this survey, we've learned a lot about Texas teachers and what's important. One of the biggest factors that's talked about is how important pay increase would be. We asked a question this year about, do teachers feel like they're paid a living wage? And 3/4 of them said they did not feel they were paid a living wage. And I think it makes sense when you look at teacher salaries across the state, adjusting for inflation, the average teacher's earning $5,000 less than they were earning a couple of years ago. So that's been a big point that our poll has found every year.
So that's a big
Yeah.
impact.
I can only imagine there's a correlation between this decline in salaries and how that's affecting teacher retention and recruitment, which is another finding that you guys had from your poll, that nearly 80% of teachers seriously considered leaving the teaching profession this last year. So do you have any idea what the primary reasons are behind why teachers are so unhappy, I guess?
Right, and that question is one, it's always a trade-off with the questionnaire, right, of when do you ask a new question versus asking the same
Right.
question to get that trend data over, and this is one we've asked every year about if teachers are seriously considering leaving. And as you mentioned, almost 80% mentioned that they are seriously considering leaving. So, and that's kind of reflected itself as we look at the teacher attrition rates across the state that have increased the past several years. So definitely the primary factor is that increase for pay and compensation that would help keep teachers in the profession. But there's a lot of other factors that teachers mention are stresses or challenges, things like having to deal with a lot of non-instructional tasks, responsibilities, working long hours, and kind of the other stresses of the job of having to do with staff shortages as well.
Okay.
So there's a variety of stressors that teachers are facing that are pushing them out of the profession.
Well, I think it's good that you're able to at least identify what some of those primary stressors are, because this is a big deal. I mean, if this many teachers are thinking about leaving, it puts our entire education system at risk. And that's where, again, if we know where some of the big push buttons are for teachers, that's where different kinds of ideas or interventions can be implemented in schools, perhaps, in collaboration with administrators, to try to ameliorate some of this displeasure teachers have with their job. And that's another area, I think, once we start trying to implement some of those solutions, where I'd love to see some of our trim members taking the opportunity to see what kinds of, causal effects their interventions are having on teacher attitudes, and then in general just retention of teachers. That's where I think we could be really helpful, because I would imagine administrators in different districts, in combination with teacher researchers, would be able to come up with hopefully some theory-based solutions as to how to improve that teacher retention. The other thing is that in that teacher poll, it identified that teachers who feel valued by administrators and peers have more positive attitudes and are less likely to leave. So we need to make sure we're incorporating administrators in the creation of these, what I'm referring to as testable solutions. And if we're going to go a long way towards turning attitudes of teachers around.
Right. That's been a really encouraging trend over the past several years as we've presented to administrators that a lot of districts are trying really innovative things to retain their teachers. Their teachers are asking for things like having more mental health days, or having some flexibility for childcare, or being assisted with providing housing. So there's a lot of interesting ideas happening across the state that administrators who do value their teachers are experimenting with. But I think you're right, there needs to be more testing of which of these are most effective in helping keep teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, there is this tension here, because we need to try to find, we need to figure out which of these solutions are the most promising ones and really put them to the test. I think your poll is the initial fuel that we need to identify the problems, and then once we find these problems, working with administrators to come up with solutions, and then testing those solutions to see how well they work. Because we're not going to know, unless we do some careful studies, we're not going to know what's going to fix these problems.
Right.
I did find an interesting dichotomy between the two polls, the Texans poll and the teachers poll. And I'm not sure you noticed this, but when I looked at it, in the opinion of Texans, they want teachers to have more autonomy and influence on what's taught in the classrooms. But in the teacher poll, 7 in 10 teachers feel like they have substantial influence over their instructional materials. And 2/3 of them feel the same way about the content that they teach. So that seems kind of odd to me. I wonder why there's that dichotomy. I'm not sure what to make of that.
That's a good point. I'm glad we have somebody, another pair of eyes looking at this and seeing the how these polls interact. I think something we're trying to look at is how does the teacher poll impact the Texas poll and vice versa over the past 5 years. I'd say maybe my first reaction is just that we need to maintain that. That if teachers, Texans want teachers to have autonomy over their curriculum in their classroom, and teachers want that too. So how do we make sure that that's maintained wherever possible and grown wherever possible?
I almost wonder if teachers don't understand the level of autonomy that parents in particular would like for them to have. Maybe they feel autonomous, but parents would like them to maybe move even further. And that could be why you see that difference, in my opinion. I still don't know.
Further research is needed, as they say, right?
Absolutely, always we can say that, right? So Kurt, there's so many takeaways from your surveys that highlight, as we just pointed out, areas for investigation. Of course, class size, which you noted in the teacher report, is a concern, and it's been shown in the literature that it has a really significant influence on academic achievement. So I'm not sure that needs further investigation in Texas, but how do we promote teacher well-being and what resources teachers find useful so that they can take personal time off as needed is certainly one area that I would see as an area for some investigation or work. The need to create stronger collegial relationships among teachers. I mean, I know that benefits me. I mean, I want to stay at UNT just because I have colleagues that I work with here that are my friends, you know.
Right.
But yeah, I think those are big things. Hopefully, our trend group, with the involvement of some educational administrators, where they feel like they have a voice and can kind of set the direction for these studies, will bring forward some interventions and ideas so that we as researchers can help identify promising solutions collaboratively with them. And as I said, uncovering the precise nature of the problem that needs to be solved is really that's what you're doing, which is the first step. And but putting research together with practitioners and administrators to come up with testable solutions is where the follow through, I think, is going to come from. If we're gonna use your findings in a smart way.
Right. And I think it's important that, right, there's over 1,000 districts in Texas. How do we know what the best ideas are that they can be replicated?
Yeah.
How do we scale those across the state? That the first step is the information sharing, right? Bringing together the researchers with the practitioners to test and learn about those.
Yeah, clearly there's population and subpopulation effects that we would need to disentangle if we were going to do any kind of study, so we know, what are the effects on males versus females, or different ethnic groups, or whoever. We would need to kind of separate those pieces out for sure.
So the intersection between research, practice, and policy is what stands out for me in the discussion today. Given policy background and training, if you had to summarize the CBF's foundation work, how would you describe your role? And what else is CBF working on today?
Well, that's a great question. I think you hit it on the nail. Policy, practice, and research, bringing those folks together. I think our goal is students and teachers and everyone involved in education to flourish, and that comes from everyone working together and learning from each other. So stay tuned. We're actually working on a new Texas teacher poll now that'll come out this fall.
Cool.
So we'll be sure to share those findings with you as soon as we get them.
That'd be great. Well, I just want to say how grateful I am that for the work that CBF is doing. I think, it's a great opportunity to take some of your existing work here and put it in play, especially here in the DFW area, to see what we can do to facilitate change through our very little but rapidly growing trend network.
No, it's exciting to see these kind of networks pop up across the state, right? We're such a big, diverse state. There's new ideas, new people, and context matters. So excited to learn from you all.
Yeah, we're excited too. So.
I can't thank you enough for driving up from Austin to joining us today and sharing your insights on your work. And I'm looking forward to hearing more later than this afternoon at our trend meeting. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tapaswini, for getting this pod together with Kurt here. I mean, I think we learned a thing or two today.
Absolutely. These discussions really highlight how research can directly impact education, policy, and practice.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with somebody who might find it valuable. Also, give us a like on our YouTube channel if you're interested in joining our Trend Network. Again, we're going to put that link below this pod video so you can fill out the form. Again, it's completely free to join, and we would love to see you at our next monthly meeting. I think our next one's going to be at Hershey-Spedford ISD. We're finalizing that next meeting now. We hold meetings at different locations throughout the DFW Metroplex to make it convenient for people to get to different ones. The meetings just last an hour, and I want to place a prime importance on allowing people to make connections. So if researchers and educational practitioners are able to strike up connections and find ways to work together, we've done our job through the network. So I hope you join us next time on the North Texas Learning Curve. Until then, take care, and we will see you next time. Bye.
See you.
See you.